Josh Hale. I'm the moderator here on the DeFi and DAO panel. I hope I can hear somebody here in a second. So I am attorney in the world of crypto, and I handle DAOs on a daily basis. You guys can find me on nonfungiblecounsel.com, and I will do my best to moderate even if I can't hear. So thank you everybody for coming. I'm joined today with Don Ho of Orange DAO, Cole Kennelly of Volmex, and Sam Padilla of ATX DAO. Each one of these entities are doing different things in the space, and the first question is, for everybody, just to get this started off, just initially what we'd like to hear is just a brief snippet of what your project or DAO is trying to do and what you're trying to build. And I'll let Don Ho start this off.
Hey everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where everyone is. My name is Don Ho. I'm managing director at Quantstamp, where we provide smart contract security audits, as well as co-founder of Orange DAO. It is a DAO of 1,300 YC founders, and our goal is to onboard the best builders in Web 2 into Web 3 and be a resource for them by being their first check, by being their community, as well as being distribution for their product. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'd like to hear from everybody. So I'm going to give Sam and Cole Oslo an opportunity to tell us a little bit. Sam, can you tell us a little bit about ATX DAO and what you're trying to do in Austin?
Yeah, for sure. So hey everyone, nice to be here. And as Don was saying, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. My name is Sam Padilla. I am one of the leaders at ATX DAO. ATX DAO simply is the Austin City DAO. ATX stands for Austin. What we're trying to do is basically we're trying to make Austin the best city in the world for crypto. And I know that's a bit of a controversial statement, and that usually gets people say, oh no, but what about my city and what about this, what about that? I think promoting competition among cities is a net positive thing for the space. But specifically what we're trying to do is via community events, via projects with the local community, and via policy advising for city and state government, we're trying to make Austin the crypto capital of the world. So have a few ideas to share, and excited to be here and excited to hear from other great panelists too.
Great. Thank you, Sam. And Cole, can you tell us a little bit about Volmex and what you're doing there?
Thanks, Josh. This is Cole Kennelly, founder and CEO of Volmex Labs. Really great to be here today. At Volmex, we're building a suite of crypto volatility products around the Ethereum and Bitcoin volatility indexes that we've built. So ultimately, we're building VIX and VIX-like products for crypto. Our mission is to deliver the best possible experiences to crypto volatility traders. We do this by, again, building a suite of products and scaling them and building awareness around our volatility index. These products are useful to different groups of users, for hedging, speculation, and market indication purposes. So I'm really excited to be here and tell you guys more about Volmex and share my views on DAOs and DeFi.
Great, thank you for being here, Cole. So we're all involved in DAOs, and I get to advise DAOs pretty regularly, both inside and outside the United States, and see what people are doing and see the upsides and downsides of DAOs, as well as how DAOs can affect DeFi particularly. I guess probably the primary question that's on a lot of people's minds for DAOs, and particularly when it comes to DeFi, is what can DAOs fix in DeFi and what can they make better? And ultimately, there's trade-offs with DAOs, right? So what do you think DAOs are well suited for, and more particularly, what do you think maybe a more centralized form of governance for a project is kind of designed for? And I'll start that off with Sam Padilla.
Yeah, I have a few thoughts there. So I think when it comes specifically to DeFi, when I think of DAOs, I think DAOs are just a way to democratize decision making and decentralized decision making. I think of DAOs as just a way to agree on something in a way that doesn't have any central saying, right? So anything that is suited for that kind of decision making that is not centralized, I think that is something that DAOs are a good thing. So for example, what we did specifically with Austin, we're trying to make Austin a better city, right? But that means a lot of different things for a lot of different people, right? Some people think, oh, you should be maybe investing a little bit more on infrastructure. Maybe you should promote more parties. Maybe you should promote more events. Maybe you should do more policy stuff, right? So how do we reach consensus by all the people who are trying to work towards the same goal in a decentralized way without anybody having a say? What I think DAOs are maybe not, specifically for Web3, right? Like there's a lot of things that DAOs are not suited for, but specifically for Web3, I think when a project is really early stage, I think some level of centralization is important to be able to control where the project is going, control where the protocol is heading, be more efficient even. There's an inherent, I see DAO efficiency, and we can expand on this later, but I see that efficiency as a curve in which at the beginning, decentralization brings lack of efficiency, but then you pass a certain threshold and then efficiency grows exponentially. And that's kind of what I like to call the Hydra operation point. But at the beginning, decentralization, implementing centralization brings a downfall in terms of efficiency. So I think at the very beginning of a project, some sort of centralization and somebody saying this is where we're going and vision orientedness is important.
Don, I see your head kind of shaking there. I'm guessing you have an opinion as to what's being said here.
Yeah, so I can't fully speak on DeFi DAOs specifically here, but I do think from a DAO perspective, the way we look at the world is it's a internet community with a bank account. And what DAOs do very well is capture the future of work and folks who are contributing at any stage or spectrum of their involvement. To the point of decentralization and centralization, I totally agree with Sam here, where DAOs are really, really different than startups. And what I mean by that is in a startup, you have a very single purpose that you do sequentially, right? Where you do one thing really well, you finish a task and do the next task. You finish that task and then you work on the next one. That's actually the opposite of a DAO. A DAO for us is when you run a million things different in parallel, right? And all of them running at the same time. And so for us at Orange DAO, that's really cool because again, we are a community of 1,300 founders, builders who do things without permission. And so to have an objective of onboarding the best builders into Web3, there's probably 1,000 different interpretations. But that's what's really cool about DAOs, where you can do a bunch of things in parallel and build, as opposed to being a startup where you're hyper-focused and really making sure that each step of the way you're doing sequentially.
So there was a phrase that Winston Churchill came up with, and it's not actually his, but he's the one who made it famous, which is democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others. And I see that a lot of what we're seeing in DAOs is a lot of the democratization of votes, but I also see that there's some pitfalls with DAOs as well. And I'd love to talk about some of that. And I'm very curious what Cole has to say about some of the benefits and some of the drawbacks of DAOs.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah, I resonate a lot with what Don and Sam said. So generally, the good things about DAOs are they align, different members in the community and the ecosystem. They also, it's ultimately a mechanism to decentralize ownership of the protocol, which is ultimately good for, the community and longevity of the protocol. Trade-offs, though, DAOs are slow. So like in order to get a decision across, there's going to be an arduous proposal process, and you're going to need to rally different token holders and things like that. I think it's also like Don was saying, they're very different than startups. So they're much harder to iterate. So it's just hard to iterate, on the protocol once it's, totally decentralized. So, if there will be minimal changes through the DAO. So so that's one thing to consider. It's, you can't move fast at that point anymore. It's, going to be a slow process. And also I think there's, probably some gray area around just like legal, jurisdiction and things like that with contributors and DAO members and stuff. But maybe that's more solved for these days. But generally, I think that's also just like an area that people should be thinking about in terms of trade-offs. So there's definitely tons of great things about DAOs, but there's a few trade-offs. So overall, we expect DAOs to be, big piece of the, future, economy, and obviously very prevalent in Web3. So definitely really exciting technology.
So, Josh, can I just make two challenges, one for Don and one for Cole. So two things that I want to say, Don. When you were defining a DAO, you were defining a DAO as an internet community like an online community that has a bank account, a shared bank account, right? So I want to challenge that definition of a DAO by saying that not necessarily, and this is why I'm so psyched on the model that we have with ATXDAO. The vast majority of DAOs that you see, they start online first, and then when they grow enough and they have enough concentration of people in certain places, they go IRL, or they promote conferences and they meet in real life. What we're doing with ATXDAO, and what we're doing with the movement of city DAOs, and there's a bunch of other DAOs that are like geography based. What we're trying to do is we're trying to start bottom up, as in like IRL first. So it's not just a community that is online; it's a community that actually exists physically in a city, in a geographic location. We know each other. We hang out with each other. We co-work every Friday from a different coffee shop. We go to each other's house parties, and we hang out at each other's houses, and we know each other like as people. And then and then like we share a bank account and we share decision making and so on, right? So not all DAOs necessarily need to be online first. And I think that's an important distinction, because that also goes to what Cole was saying about DAOs are slow. I think DAOs tend to be slow when you need to coordinate, of course, across multiple decision makers, but at the same time, you need to coordinate across multiple time zones, and you need to coordinate via Discord. It is a lot easier to coordinate when you're able all to meet like on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis or monthly basis, all the members of the DAO, or at least the most active members, and say, okay, what are we doing? How are we going to actually get this forward? The in-person aspect of city DAOs makes city DAOs a lot more efficient, because you're actually able to get things moving faster, a lot quicker, right? So, and the last point that I wanted to make is like, this is also an entirely different discussion on how decentralized is the DAO directly, because not everything needs to go through a voting process, right? If you're going to change something on the website, you don't need necessarily to put it up for voting. You can just do it. But then that's where the DAO needs to draw the line. It's like, okay, what do we actually put up for voting, and what do we just like execute on individually or as committees, right? So just wanted to make those 2 points, and Josh, back to you.
Yeah, so kind of what you're talking about, Sam, is the idea behind a lot of what I do is more specifically the idea of what is the difference between a democracy and a republic, right? You have a situation in DAOs where maybe a DAO does vote on every single change to the website, and that's like a pure democracy. That's where everybody decides everything, and that does slow things down, obviously, when you have a situation where everything is voted upon. And what it seems like a lot of DAOs are starting to move towards is more of a republic democracy. And I very specifically have been arguing for that for a while, the idea of like a checks and balances DAO, or a centralized, decentralized autonomous organization. You know, and then you have the issues of law, right? Like, for example, Cole is very familiar with the idea of the gray space of law. I'm very sure, because if you go to volmex.finance and try to enter their app from the United States, you're not going to be able to. And I'd love to hear, you know, a little bit about how that's happening and why that. I'm sure his attorney has advised him to do that. And right now we have a lot of gray space in DAOs, and more particularly in finance. And I'd love to hear about Cole's opinion in that world as well. And you're muted. There you go.
Yeah, sure. So first off, Sam, you had some interesting points there on the city DAO. I haven't thought about the in-person aspect. That's quite interesting. You know, I think that could add an interesting element to DAOs, and mostly think about them, you know, totally virtual, but remote, but that makes sense. Josh, I think specifically for Volmex, we're building derivative products, and the derivative regulation in the US for crypto assets is somewhat nebulous and also, you know, generally unclear. So I think until there's more regulation with regards to like, are crypto asset derivatives regulated as traditional commodity derivatives, or they fall into some traditional sector in the US, or fall into some other, I should say, fall into another, you know, crypto asset regulation. We took the proactive approach to, you know, geo-block US users, and you know, think, you know, that's a very, you know, thoughtful way to go about this, and we don't want to, you know, violate any sort of regulation in the US. So that's kind of the approach we've taken for now. But, you know, long term, we definitely would love to operate in the US, and are kind of working towards doing that in an above board way. So Yeah, totally correct. Right now, our product is not available. The trading, of the product, the tokens, not available to U.S. users, but U.S. users could use our index as a market indicator and just follow along at charts.volmex.finance and understand the volatility index levels and but they're not able to trade the product because of the regulation uncertainty. So great question, and I think much of what I said is probably relevant to DAOs, but I think a lot of DAOs are generally operating in the U.S., taking it a step further, not even doing any geo blocking or anything, just they have tons of U.S. Representatives and entities and contributors. So I think it's a broader question to the group, like how do you think about that sort of regulation? And I think I think there's a lot of people who take. So I think there's a bunch of questions there, but how do we think about DAOs as they relate to the U.S. kind of question for the group? So that's a great question, Josh. That's how I think about that, and then I kind of would spin that to the other question there.
Yeah, I would kind of take it a step further there, and I'm going to pose this to Don. Don, I'm sure you've seen some legal hiccups and legal headaches, trying to be part of a DAO. And more specifically, I regularly talk about the idea that DAO in and of itself does not mean the word safe. And a lot of people that are in the world of DAOs on a daily basis assume that because it's decentralized, that automatically makes them safe for purposes of government exposure, purposes of lawsuit exposure, whole 9 yards. I'm curious what sort of headaches and government oversight you've seen for Orange DAO as well.
Yeah, again, we're a little different where we don't necessarily have a product like a DeFi product or something that has been progressively decentralized, right? For us, again, we are a commune and a collective of builders, and really what we hear horror stories of actually from other DAOs is really establishing what that nexus is, to your point, but also what sort of legal implications are. And so the advice we always provide other folks building DAOs is to always consult a lawyer first and to really figure out what the exact purpose of the DAO is. For example, I think a lot of people think that by just setting up a DAO and investing in things, you're going to be okay because perhaps they're all just internet characters or anonymous folks online. What you find, though, is if you do that format, you are a fund, and every single member of your community, whether they're KYC'd or not, is acting, frankly, as a financial operator. And that's something you don't want to be doing, right? And so while I think it's really great that we're starting to see a Cambrian explosion of these online communities and perhaps physical communities who have some level of decentralized decision making, our advice, again, is to always consult your legal jurisdiction to figure out what the right classification is. For Orange DAO, we are a Cayman Foundation. And as a result of that, we have our own local jurisdiction we have to follow, but also still other jurisdictions like the US. In addition to this, again, I alluded to this, but the notion of having a fund or raising money via a DAO, those have very big implications depending on where your folks are and even how big your DAO can be. And so, for example, if you just pull capital together from a bunch of internet characters online and you begin investing, well, technically speaking, you might even have a 99-person limit because you are a fund or classified as that. And from a safety and I guess culpability perspective, all your members are then actually legally responsible. But again, that really depends on your jurisdiction, the purpose of your DAO, and you speaking with your own legal representatives, which I highly recommend.
Yeah, I obviously, as an attorney, that's magic to my ears. This is what I do full time. And I always tell people you should really be thinking about, what your steps are in order to be compliant wherever you are. And I do Cayman Foundations pretty regular, so I'm very familiar with what Orange DAO is doing. Is ATX and or Volmex, are they registered in the United States, or where are they registered, guys?
We are a Texas LLC, and that's something that I wanted to comment too. Is I think there's a valid distinction to be drawn here between say securities law, like what Cole was talking about, or even just like laws at federal level that keep you from operating or keep you from issuing tokens or make you cautious about issuing tokens at a federal level. And then the other one is the side of operations of your DAO. And this is completely different for a city DAO because we actually have a side of operations. We operate in Austin, right? We're ATX out. We're not going to be doing stuff in like I don't know, the Cayman Islands or something like that, right? Because we're here. So I think when it comes to incorporating as a DAO that has a geographic bound, incorporating as specifically in the US, incorporating as an LLC, most of the time gets the work done, and most DAOs are incorporated as LLC. And this is actually something that we're actively working on here in Texas, at least. Is we're trying to draft some policy proposals to amend. Just change language a little bit in the LLC regulation to be more encompassing and include DAOs as well, and explicitly also include DAOs. So I think there's something exciting happening in like forward-thinking states here in the U.S. So you have Wyoming, you have I think Tennessee as well. I think you have Texas with the work that we're doing. So there's a lot of exciting things happening there when you're operating in a geographically bound location. But when you have a completely global DAO, that's a challenge, right? Because like, how do you define your bounds of operations, and then how do you like structure legally to be operating in the ether of the internet, right? So that's but like we conduct business in Texas, right? We raise sponsor. We have gotten sponsorships for our events. We promote events. We do token sales, NFT sales, and so on. So like it's an interesting dynamic because we're local, but it's a whole different spiel when you're not.
So really quick there, I'm very curious, Sam, just to play devil's advocate, right? Does this limit your scope of what you can do if you go beyond Austin or beyond the state of Texas?
Well, because our focus is mainly Austin, right? Like we're ATX out, we're trying to make Austin the crypto capital of the world, but that is not necessarily that the idea cannot spread. Just ATX DAO has no business doing anything in Dallas, but it doesn't mean that people in Dallas can't start a Dallas DAO, right? Or people in LA cannot start like an LAX DAO. So that's kind of the what we're trying to push forward here. We do want to expand. We don't want to expand ATX DAO. We want to expand the movement of city DAOs. So the idea spreads, our work continues local, and I think that's also really valuable because you don't have a top-down approach in which there's an online community saying, oh, this is how the culture is going to be happening in Austin, in Miami, in New York. Every single city DAO across the world that starts to come up, and that's something we're actively working on, has the mentality of, oh, we're local people who came together and we're joining this bigger network just because we want to be part of this network and we want to build relationships with Austin and all other city DAOs. But we're local and we're doing this for our city. So I think it's again like a bottom-up approach to DAOs rather than like the traditional top-down approach of most online then IRL DAOs.
And what about Volmex? What's your status, guys?
Oh, thanks for asking. So we're still at the point where we're building and scaling our products. So we're not a DAO. That doesn't mean that couldn't be something we pursue in the future. And if we were to pursue that, we would obviously work with Counsel. So there's a number of great, firms out there. Actually, not too many actually that are available, but that could help us, provision the necessary entities and do this in a compliant way. So I think we would kind of go the similar route if we were to ever theoretically do that. There's a kind of a path to doing that with some, relationship between labs type entity and the kind of like issuers of a DAO and that type of thing. So we're not there yet, but that's how we think about it generally, and we're registered in the US. Yeah.
I think that's kind of the overall conversation here is the idea that when you're building these, and this is kind of what Don alluded to, that you have a situation of possibly limiting the scope of a DAO or limiting what the DAO has an ability to vote upon. And I'm curious kind of how you've built that within Orange DAO, and is it a pure democracy, or is it more kind of what we were discussing before of more of a republic democracy where certain choices are made by a central authority and others by the DAO?
Yeah, so specifically with Orange DAO, it's certainly far more like a republic, right? In the sense that based on specific decisions, such as what is the amount being spent or being deployed. if it's under a certain threshold, should committees or a subgroup of folks decide upon that? And only when a certain threshold is passed does it go to a total governance vote, right? Same thing with how we think about membership, right? What things about our membership does everyone need to vote on, as opposed to a more select committee based on specific characteristics of that governance decision? And so what's very cool about Orange DAO is we have 3 committees, a development committee, a treasury committee, a governance committee. And it's great because they all have, to everyone's point, these checks and balances, but also these nuances based on what each committee is focused on. Right. And so for us, it's truly a republic. And I think going forward, right, Orange DAO is trying to be a very big global digital nation. And we're going to continue to see more experiments based on a sub DAO or a committee driven sort of decision making process.
And how is ATX DAO taking, decisions? Are they more Republican form, or are they more, as somebody said to me in New York, are they more kumbaya driven? Are they everybody makes a choice for everybody?
Yeah, I wouldn't qualify us in either of those 2 buckets of like with either democracy or a republic. I think there's a spectrum, right? I think we sit somewhere in between, in which the way that our governance happens right now. And one of the coolest things about DAOs, and I think this is my biggest pet peeve with the current governance system, is it's really hard to iterate our governance system. Anyone can put up a proposal to iterate our governance systems, which I think is really, really valuable. But the way that we're structured right now is we have multiple committee heads. We have several committees. They're all on our website. And each committee has certain independence of operations within the scope of that committee. When any decision that touches the treasury, at any amount that touches the treasury is going to be made by the committee beyond a certain budget that the committee gets allocated, then we need to put that up for proposal. And those committee heads get chosen democratically by all the members of the DAO twice a year. So we have a strong rotation of leadership. We have certain independence of operations within a certain scope. And then we also have, for big decisions, all big decisions need to be approved by the broad community.
We are getting short on time here, guys. So I'm going to ask one last question and have all 3 of you answer it as briefly as possible. Of what do you see is the future of DAOs? Is it going to exist as it does now, or do you see some other form? And we'll start that off with Cole.
Thanks, Josh. So this is actually something that's seemingly coming up a lot on Twitter, crypto Twitter, if you will, recently, where there's just a lot of growing pains with these DAOs. So I do think there's a lot of areas, a number of areas for improvement to, maybe delegation is one of them, more delegation to, stakeholders and kind of delegating, votes, and maybe that can make the voting process more efficient. But generally, it feels like the sentiment in pretty much every community is that, DAOs, there's a lot of growing pains with DAOs and decentralizing and progressively centralizing. So there's a lot of areas for improvement. And I think we'll see a lot of experimentation and innovation, new models coming to market, and, improvements in the coming, months and years. So I think, there's going to be a lot of changes, but, we've already seen some primitives that have been launched, namely the, compound, governance Bravo framework. There's like an Open Zeppelin version of that. There's also a few others, but so there's been some great Legos created in governance, but I think there'll be like a number of other innovations coming. So great question, great to be here, and that's how I feel. That's how we think about that.
Sam, what about you? What do you think the future of DAOs are?
I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done to get there, but I think the end game of DAOs is not social DAOs, it's not investment DAOs. The end game of DAOs is decentralized nation building. I think what DeFi did to finance is what DAOs are going to do to governance. I think this is a part of crypto that changes the way that we govern or share resources at scale. And I think this is a part of crypto that actually innovates governance. So I'm super psyched, and that's part of the work that we're doing with ATXDAO. I think this is popular not because of Balaji's book, but the network state, that's kind of what we're trying to work towards. In Game of DAOs is decentralized nation building. That's what I firmly believe and work for.
Great. And Don, what about you? We'll start.
Sam took it right out of my mouth. I think DAOs are sort of the first iteration of network states. And in the specific example of Orange, right, we think about it of Silicon Valley in the cloud. In Web2, you flew to Silicon Valley with a one-way ticket to become a tech founder. I think in Web3, you join these different network states and online organizations to advance whatever directive or goal you want to be doing.
Great. Everybody, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being part of the DeFi Summit today. Thanks for taking part of the DeFi and DAO panel. We appreciate all of your input. Sam, Cole, Don, thanks for your time. And please be in touch. Please look at all of these guys on social media. You have Orange DAO, you have ATX DAO, and you have Volmex.finance. And you'll see some pretty cool things that are being built, and hopefully you guys can take part and see what communities are being built in each of these different DAOs and different entities like Volmex. Thanks for being here, guys, and we appreciate your time.
This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me. Thanks for having us. See you guys.
Thank you, folks. Bye.